This is a story of defiance, justice, and transformation. It follows a powerful, determined black female attorney who steps into a courtroom filled with doubt, prejudice, and quiet whispers that scream louder than any gavel. No one believes she can win. Not the judge, not her peers, not even her own client at first. But she doesn't just walk into the courtroom, she owns it. What unfolds is a battle not only for a verdict, but for dignity, truth, and legacy. At the heart of this narrative is a deep exploration of systemic racism, gender discrimination, and the stereotypes that plague black women in positions of power. It's not just a legal case, it's a soul fight. It's about dismantling every assumption, one brilliant argument at a time. The genre is a blend of courtroom drama and social thriller. It's rooted in reality but plays like a suspense film. Every word spoken in the courtroom feels like a swing of the pendulum between justice and injustice. The pacing keeps the reader emotionally charged while the central mystery of the case unfolds with layers that surprise even the most cynical minds. The dominant emotion that courses through this story is vindication, but it is preceded by moments of humiliation, rage, isolation, and quiet strength. As the protagonist is tested, challenged, and even threatened, her perseverance shines. The emotional arc builds from frustration to fire, until the final verdict drops like thunder. This is not just about winning a case. It's about proving to the world, and to herself, that she never needed permission to be powerful. It's about breaking silence in a room full of noise. It's about showing up in spaces that weren't built for you, and making them yours. This story is a mic drop in the courtroom of doubt. You don't belong here. Those were the first words she heard that morning. Not from the judge. Not from opposing counsel. From the security guard at the courthouse entrance. Janelle Monroe adjusted her blazer, flashed her badge, and walked in anyway. She didn't flinch, but it stung. Inside courtroom 9B, it smelled like dust, nerves, and fresh coffee. The kind of room where justice was supposed to be blind. But Janelle knew better. Justice saw everything. Your color, your gender, your power, and weighed it before you ever said a word. The clerk glanced at her, and then looked past her, assuming she was someone's assistant. A young white intern across the aisle whispered, "Is she the paralegal?" Another smirked. Janelle stood alone at the plaintiff's table. She placed her leather case down and took out her notes. Calm, focused. But inside, a storm raged. Across the room sat Wallace and Trent, a high-powered law firm with a win record longer than most people's careers. 3 men in sleek suits. Confident. Casual. The lead, Brent Carlisle, leaned back and laughed at something on his phone. He didn't even glance at her. She had been handed a case no one wanted, an impossible civil rights lawsuit against a tech company accused of racial discrimination and wrongful termination. The evidence? Circumstantial. The witnesses? Terrified. The press? Ignoring it. And her own firm? Expecting her to fail. This wasn't a promotion. It was a setup, and they thought she wouldn't see it. Janelle didn't care. Because deep down, she knew what they didn't. She had something they could never take from her, the truth. The door creaked open, and her client walked in, Darnell Hayes, a former project manager, head low, eyes sunken. He looked at Janelle like a man who had already accepted defeat. "You sure about this?" he asked softly. "I don't show up unless I'm sure," she said. He nodded but didn't smile. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered, an older man, white, with eyes that scanned like lasers and a voice like gravel. He glanced at Janelle, paused, and then looked down at the paperwork. "Ms. Monroe," he said slowly, "you're representing Mr. Hayes?" "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, voice firm, chin high. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise. Maybe even amusement. She saw it, and she remembered. They were all waiting for her to make a mistake. To fumble. To cry. To be emotional. To confirm every stereotype they had dressed her in before she walked through the doors. But Janelle wasn't here to meet expectations. She was here to shatter them. The opposing counsel stood up to begin. "Your Honor," Brent Carlisle said, oozing confidence, "we believe this case is a complete waste of the court's time. We intend to file a motion to dismiss immediately." Janelle didn't blink. She just stared at him, like a lion waiting for her prey to run. The judge looked at her. "Ms. Monroe, any response?" She stood, slowly, deliberately. Every eye in the room turned to her. "Yes, Your Honor, she said. She took one step forward, heels echoing like war drums. This case, she continued, locking eyes with Brent, isn't just about wrongful termination. It's about a system that punishes those who speak up and rewards those who silence them. It's about accountability. And I intend to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that my client was targeted, dismissed, and degraded. Not for performance, but for the color of his skin. Silence. Then murmurs. Even the judge looked slightly taken aback. She didn't sit back down. She held her ground. Objection, Brent muttered, half rising. Overruled, the judge said, still watching her. A moment passed, and then it began. Janelle Monroe didn't grow up dreaming of courtrooms. She grew up surrounded by voices telling her what she couldn't do. Raised in East Baltimore, in a neighborhood where police sirens were more common than ice cream trucks, she learned early how the world worked. Her mother worked 2 jobs, one at a diner, one cleaning offices, and still barely paid rent. Her father was gone before she turned 5, and her older brother? A statistic before he reached 20. At 13, Janelle watched her mother sob into her apron after being fired without reason. No use fighting it, her mother had said. They always win. Janelle never forgot that. By the time she was 16, she was reading law books from the public library while her friends hung out at the mall. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was building armor. Her dream wasn't just to become a lawyer. It was to become the kind of lawyer who terrified the people who thought women like her weren't capable. Now, at 32, Janelle had become just that. A licensed attorney, graduate of Howard University, then NYU Law, top of her class. Sharp, focused, unrelenting. But none of that changed the way she was seen. Even in her own firm, a prestigious downtown firm with glass walls and endless suits, she was often mistaken for an assistant. Called sweetheart in meetings. Passed over for high-profile cases. And every time she tried to speak up, she was told to be careful, don't be too aggressive, or don't take it personally. She took it personally, but she turned every slight into fuel. Still, the pressure weighed on her. Her body was tired more often. Her smiles didn't reach her eyes as much. And when she looked in the mirror some nights, brushing the sweat from her forehead after 14-hour days, she'd whisper to herself, "You have to keep going. You're not done yet." Janelle was single, not because she didn't believe in love, but because she hadn't found someone who truly understood her fire. Her friends joked she was married to the grind, and maybe they were right. Her apartment was clean, minimal, bookshelves lined with volumes on civil rights, Black history, landmark cases. She had framed photographs of Thurgood Marshall and her late mother hanging side by side above her desk. That was her world. That, and the cases she poured her soul into. But even she couldn't deny this one felt different. The case of Darnell Hayes wasn't just another client on her list. It hit deeper. His story mirrored the quiet trauma so many had endured, being told they were too much, too loud, not a good fit. He had been fired from his job at Glance Tech, a rising AI software company, for insubordination. But the deeper she dug, the more she found whispers, subtle slights in emails, racially charged performance reviews, exclusion from team meetings. And worse, a pattern. Other Black employees had quietly left. No HR complaints. No lawsuits. Just resignation, the kind of quiet defeat companies count on. Janelle knew what was at stake. But her colleagues didn't believe in the case. They saw it as weak, circumstantial, doomed from the start. Her partner, Mr. Langford, had handed it to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A good opportunity for growth, he'd said. She knew what that meant, sacrificial lamb. She accepted it anyway, because if she won, it would change everything. But winning meant more than just the courtroom. It meant convincing Darnell to trust her, to fight when he was tired, to stand when it was easier to shrink. And he wasn't there yet. Not fully. The night before the trial, Janelle stayed in the office until 3 a.m., poring over statements, organizing evidence, rereading testimony until her eyes blurred. Her mind kept going back to her mother. They always win. Not this time. Not while she had breath in her body. There was a photo on her desk, her at her law school graduation, her mother on one side, and her best friend Renee on the other. Her mother's eyes were shining with pride. Janelle stared at it now, sipping cold coffee, her voice soft. "I'm gonna win this one, Ma." She wasn't fearless, but she was relentless. Her weakness? She carried too much alone. She didn't know how to ask for help. She let the weight of the world sit on her shoulders because she'd been taught that was the only way to survive. Her fear? That even when she gave everything, it still wouldn't be enough. But she showed up anyway. Hair tight in a bun. Suit pressed. Heels steady. Because if they were going to doubt her, they'd have to do it while watching her rise. The second day of the trial changed everything. Janelle arrived early, earlier than anyone else. She stood in the middle of the empty courtroom, breathing in the silence, grounding herself. The sunlight hit the wooden benches just right, casting golden bars across the floor like a divine omen. She needed that omen. Because today, Darnell would testify. And it had to be perfect. She had spent hours prepping him, walking through every possible question, every inconsistency in his story, every potential attack Brent Carlile and his team might throw. But there was something Janelle couldn't prepare for: fear. The kind of fear Darnell had lived with for years. The fear of standing up in a world that taught him to sit down and stay quiet. The courtroom filled slowly, journalists, observers, interns pretending not to stare. Janelle saw Brent whispering to his associate, laughing. She could feel their confidence like cologne in the air. Plaintiff, call your next witness. Janelle stood. The plaintiff calls Darnell Hayes to the stand. Darnell walked to the stand like a man walking into a storm. His posture was tight, jaw clenched, eyes darting. She saw it. Everyone saw it. The jury shifted slightly, reading him, measuring him. She gave him a nod. A small one, but strong. You've got this, it said. He raised his right hand, swore in, and sat. Janelle approached. Mr. Hayes, she began. Can you tell the court what your role was at GlanceTech? He cleared his throat. Project manager. I led a team of developers for AI compliance and ethics. How long were you employed there? Almost 5 years. And during those years, did you receive any disciplinary action? No, he said. My performance reviews were good. I was even up for promotion, until I wasn't. The courtroom leaned in. Janelle continued. Can you describe what changed? He paused. A new director came in, Daniel Merrick. At first, it was small things. I wasn't invited to certain meetings. Some of my responsibilities were reassigned. I asked questions, but I was told to not make waves. Then one day, I spoke up during a meeting about how the AI was producing biased outputs, and everything shifted. Shifted how? I was told I was being negative, that I didn't understand the big picture. A week later, I got a write-up. My emails were monitored. Eventually, I was fired for insubordination. But I was just doing my job. I was trying to make the software fair. Janelle let it sit. She could feel the jury listening now, breathing slower, heads tilted. Mr. Hayes, she said gently, do you believe your termination was racially motivated? Yes, he said. No hesitation. Why? Because I wasn't the only one. There were others. Quiet firings. Unofficial demotions. People like me. Black employees. One day, they're part of the team. The next, gone. There was silence. And then Brent Carlile stood up. Your Honor, he said. Permission to cross-examine? The judge nodded. Brent smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. Mr. Hayes, he began, casually walking, hands in pockets. You say you were fired for calling out bias in a software. But the emails you sent, they don't say that, do they? They say I was concerned about the results. Right. But you didn't call it racist, did you? Darnell hesitated. Not in those words. So perhaps the company misunderstood your intentions? I don't think so. Brent stepped closer. You were warned about your tone in meetings. Is that correct? Once, yes. Warned for being aggressive? I was told I was being too passionate. Brent smiled wider. And you don't think that was just feedback? Perhaps you were difficult? Objection. Janelle rose. Sustained, said the judge. But the seed had been planted. Brent paced. You weren't the only one fired in that quarter, were you? No. So how do you know your race was a factor? Darnell's voice cracked, just slightly. Because when I walked into rooms, I felt it. Every day. Feelings don't equal facts, Mr. Hayes. Objection. Overruled. Brent turned back to the jury. No further questions. Darnell looked shaken, like a man who had just been stripped bare in front of a crowd. Janelle's fists clenched under the table. She leaned toward him during the recess. You did good. I looked weak. No, she said. You looked human. He didn't respond. After the recess, something worse happened. Janelle received a sealed envelope. It had no name, just a file folder. Inside were photographs, screenshots, documents. Her heart dropped. It was a smear campaign. Anonymous, but brutal. An old arrest record, expunged. Personal texts taken out of context. Even a photo of Darnell at a protest years ago, holding a sign that said, "Burn the system." This wasn't just court strategy. This was character assassination. Brent Carlile pretended to be surprised when Janelle presented it to the judge, claimed he had just received it. But she saw the glint in his eye. They were going to destroy Darnell's credibility. And worse, they were willing to do it publicly. Later that evening, Janelle sat at her desk, the documents spread before her like a battlefield. Her heart was pounding, her chest tight, because she knew what was coming. Tomorrow, they'd present this to the court, frame him as an angry, unstable black man with a history, not as the professional, ethical, brilliant person she knew he was. And unless she acted, unless she turned this whole thing around, the case was over. This was the moment, the shift, where it wasn't just about the facts. It was about perception, power, optics. She looked out the window, city lights blurring into streaks. Then she turned back to her files and whispered, "They're going to regret this." Janelle didn't sleep that night. She didn't even try. Instead, she went back through every document, every timeline, every statement Darnell had ever made, looking not just for truth, but for ammunition. She knew now that facts alone wouldn't win this case. She needed impact, something undeniable, something that couldn't be spun. Because Brent Carlile had made one thing very clear. He wasn't just going to fight dirty. He was going to bury Darnell beneath the weight of old scars. But Janelle had something Brent didn't. Fire. And a memory like a vault. She pulled out her laptop and opened an old email thread. One that had seemed irrelevant weeks ago, just a string of documents from Discovery. But buried in those attachments, there it was. An internal GlanceTech memo, dated 6 months before Darnell's termination. Subject line, Public Image Strategy. Within it, a list of employees flagged for perception risks. Darnell's name was highlighted. Next to it, high visibility plus disruptive behavior equals potential PR liability. Disruptive behavior? He asked questions. He requested audits. He wasn't disruptive. He was right. She scrolled further. Another email from a junior HR employee flagging a discrepancy in the firing process. She noted that Darnell's termination was rushed. The protocol skipped. No standard review. Janelle sat back in her chair, adrenaline buzzing like a live wire. They rushed his firing because they were scared, not of lawsuits, but of exposure. She opened her phone and called Micah, the private investigator she had on retainer. "I need every internal company policy manual from GlanceTech over the past 6 years. And if anyone there talked to the press, I want transcripts." "Got it," Micah said. "Anything else?" "Yes. Find out who else was fired in that same quarter as Darnell. And find me someone willing to talk." She didn't sleep. By morning, she had a lead. A woman named Naomi Riggins, former software engineer. Fired 2 weeks before Darnell. No official reason ever given. Janelle drove across town and knocked on Naomi's apartment door just after 9 a.m. Naomi opened cautiously. "Who are you?" "I'm Janelle Carter. I'm representing Darnell Hayes." Naomi's face stiffened. She didn't say anything. "I know what they did to you," Janelle said softly. "And I know they'll keep doing it. Unless someone speaks up." Naomi's eyes flicked down, then up again. "Why now?" "Because now, the whole world's watching." Naomi let her in. Inside the small living room, Naomi pulled out a dusty box and dropped it on the coffee table. "Everything's in there," she said. "Emails, memos. The write-up they gave me said I was too assertive for the culture. I never raised my voice once." Janelle sifted through the paperwork. More of the same pattern. Employees of color marked for vague personality issues. Culture mismatch. Too aggressive. Unprofessional. Always subjective. Always impossible to defend against. "Will you testify?" Janelle asked. Naomi hesitated, then nodded. "If it'll stop them from doing this again, yeah, I will." Later that day, Janelle filed a motion to admit Naomi's testimony as evidence of a pattern, a strategic firing of outspoken minority employees to preserve the company's image and avoid ethical scrutiny. Brent Carlile objected, of course. The judge ruled the testimony tentatively admissible, pending relevance, which meant Janelle had one shot to make it count. Back in court, she called Naomi to the stand. The courtroom quieted. Naomi took a breath and began. "I was told I wasn't a good fit. But that only started after I questioned an algorithm that ranked user desirability. The results heavily favored lighter skin tones. When I pointed it out, I was told I was projecting my own issues. The room stiffened. Janelle approached slowly. Were there others who noticed these patterns? Yes, but they stayed silent. They saw what happened to me. Why are you speaking out now? Naomi looked at Darnell. Because someone has to. Brent's cross-examination was weak. He tried to discredit her, but Naomi was clear, calm, and unshakable. She wasn't angry. She wasn't dramatic. She was honest. And the jury felt it. That night, Janelle finally let herself breathe. A small breath. Not victory, but momentum. Until her phone rang. It was Micah. You're not going to believe this, he said. You know the anonymous documents they sent you? The smear packet. Yeah. Well, they messed up. How? The metadata on the photo of Darnell at the protest? It wasn't scraped from public social media like they claimed. It came from an internal HR file. One that's not supposed to be accessible without director-level clearance. Janelle sat up. You're telling me Glance Tech leaked private HR documents to sabotage their own ex-employee during a federal trial? I'm saying they got sloppy. Can you prove it? I'm already building the chain. You'll have it by tomorrow. She hung up, pulse racing. This wasn't just a smear campaign. It was a violation of federal privacy laws. She could feel the tide turning. But the war wasn't over. The next morning, Janelle filed a motion for sanctions against Glance Tech for tampering and unauthorized release of sealed records. The courtroom erupted. Brent's confidence cracked, for the first time. His cheeks flushed as he stood to object. But the judge didn't stop her this time. Janelle showed the chain of custody. Micah's metadata. The timestamps. The internal tags that proved the documents hadn't come from a public source. This wasn't coincidence, she told the court. It was sabotage. Because the truth threatens them more than any lawsuit ever could. Whispers filled the gallery. The judge called a recess. Janelle stepped outside, hands shaking. This was the beginning of something bigger. Not just a case. A reckoning. Outside, she saw Darnell. He looked different now. Calmer. Stronger. Whatever happens, he said, thank you. Janelle smiled. We're not done yet. But even as she said it, she knew. This wasn't just about proving a company wrong. It was about proving a system wrong. And she wasn't backing down. The courtroom buzzed with tension the next morning. Word had spread. News outlets began to circle like hawks. And for the first time, the narrative wasn't about the troubled former employee. It was about corporate misconduct, leaked documents, and retaliation. Janelle walked in wearing a crimson blouse, not by accident. It was a war color. A color that said, look at me. I'm not hiding anymore. She sat down, opened her case files, and waited. The judge called the court into session. Before we resume, I've reviewed the evidence regarding the breach of confidentiality, Judge Halverson said. Ms. Carter, do you have any final comments? Janelle stood, crisp and composed. Yes, Your Honor. We've established that Glance Tech willfully violated federal employment protections by leaking sealed internal files to discredit my client. The damage to Mr. Hayes' reputation is immeasurable, and this behavior not only compromises the integrity of this trial, it reveals the extent of the lengths they're willing to go to hide the truth. Judge Halverson nodded. Mr. Carlisle? Brent stood, face tight, tone clipped. We assert that any breach, if it occurred, was not authorized by my client's executive team. If such evidence was leaked, it was done so by a rogue employee. Janelle's voice cut clean through the air. Then let's bring them in. The room fell silent. Brent flinched. His jaw tightened. The judge raised a brow. Bring who in, Ms. Carter? Janelle walked to her table, picked up a folder, and handed it to the clerk. Exhibit 59. Internal email correspondence. A message sent from the chief legal officer of Glance Tech to the HR director, instructing them to eliminate exposure risk before the trial begins. She let the words hang in the air. The file in question was attached to that email. Metadata confirms it. Brent didn't speak. Couldn't speak. The judge ordered an immediate recess. Outside, Janelle stared down the line of reporters waiting like vultures. She didn't stop to answer questions. Not yet. But the moment she stepped into the hallway, Micah was waiting. I have something else, he said, eyes sharp. And you're not gonna like it. She froze. What is it? Micah handed her a flash drive. It's a security recording. From 6 months ago. Taken from a private parking garage. She plugged it into her laptop. Grainy footage. Nighttime. A black car. A tall man stepping out. Darnell. Then another man approached him. Leaned close. They argued. The audio was low, but clear enough. You think the board's gonna back you up? You're a liability, Darnell. You can't hide this forever. The other man shoved Darnell back against the car. The timestamp blinked on screen. Then something wild happened. The aggressor turned to leave, but not before dropping a phrase that sent a chill through Janelle's spine. You open your mouth, and your sister's job disappears by morning. Janelle paused the video. She stared, not at the timestamp, not at Darnell, but at the other man's face. She zoomed in. She knew that face. It was Brent Carlisle. Micah's voice was low. That was 6 months before the trial began, before any legal filings. Carlisle was trying to silence him, personally. Janelle exhaled slowly. This wasn't just dirty legal tactics anymore. This was blackmail. It was criminal intimidation. She returned to her office, pulled out a yellow notepad, and started writing her motion for emergency sanctions, not just against GlanceTech, but against Brent himself. By the time court resumed that afternoon, she had it ready. The judge reviewed the footage. Silence. Then Judge Halverson looked up, the weight of the video pressing on his expression like bricks. This court takes such allegations with the utmost seriousness. I will be launching a formal inquiry into Mr. Carlisle's conduct. Brent rose. Your Honor, this isn't outrageous. Sit down, Mr. Carlisle. The judge's voice cracked like thunder. And just like that, everything shifted. The defense was fractured. Their lead attorney compromised. GlanceTech's PR team scrambled. Within hours, they released a statement regretting the handling of the case and announcing Carlisle's temporary removal pending internal review. But the damage was done. That night, Janelle sat alone in her office, surrounded by papers, files, coffee cups, and exhaustion. But she felt it, the current turning, the storm slowing. Her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She answered. A voice, deep, female. I saw the broadcast. I used to work in their London office. I have emails. From higher up. They knew. They talked about him like a PR stain. I can send you everything. Janelle's hands trembled. Yes, please. The voice continued. But I want immunity before I send anything. I'm not risking my life for this. I'll make it happen. She hung up and called the U.S. Attorney's office. Janelle Carter, she said. I have a corporate whistleblower ready to go on record. And what she has, it's not just civil. It's federal. By dawn, she had the documents. A treasure trove of emails, Slack messages, meeting summaries, internal communications revealing that Darnell was targeted not for poor performance, but because of a financial report he compiled, uncovering millions in unaccounted funds tied to offshore vendors. He tried to flag it, and they silenced him. This wasn't just a discrimination case anymore. It was corporate fraud, federal crimes. Now, everything was on the table. The media swarmed. Headlines exploded. GlanceTech under investigation for fraud and discrimination. Lead counsel faces criminal inquiry in federal trial. But in the chaos, Janelle kept her head down. There was still a trial to win. Still a man's name to clear. In the courtroom the next day, she stood before the jury. Mr. Hayes wasn't fired because he underperformed, she said. He was fired because he stood up. Because he told the truth. Because he saw something wrong and dared to speak out. And instead of protecting him, they tried to erase him. The jury watched her. Silent. Focused. She continued. Darnell Hayes is not the enemy here. He is the mirror they tried to smash. The truth they tried to bury. But we dug it up. She paused. And now? Now we hold them accountable. Outside, reporters shouted her name. Inside, she stayed still. Centered. Because she knew the twist had happened. Not just in the case. In everything. Janelle wasn't just defending one man anymore. She was defending every voice that had ever been silenced. Every career that had ever been destroyed for daring to tell the truth. Every woman. Every person of color. Every whistleblower. Every underdog who ever heard the words. You won't win. And she'd looked that lie in the eye and burned it down. The case had entered its final stages, but the pressure on Janelle was suffocating. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about surviving. She had spent sleepless nights, pored over evidence, made alliances with whistleblowers, and watched as Brent Carlisle's facade crumbled piece by piece. Her entire strategy had built towards this, dismantling the corporate lies and shining a light on the shadowy figures who hid behind them. But now, As the final trial date approached, Janelle was faced with a choice that she had hoped would never come. It was early morning when she got the call. Her assistant, Laura, sounded frantic. "Janelle, you need to come to the office right now. There's someone here. They're offering you a deal." Janelle felt the chill of warning. "A deal? Who? I can't say. But you need to come. It's serious." She grabbed her jacket and raced to the office. When she arrived, Laura was waiting at the door. "It's him," she said softly, glancing over her shoulder. Brent Carlisle sat at Janelle's desk, his usual cocky demeanor replaced with a rare vulnerability. His tie was undone, his suit jacket removed, as if he were preparing for something much darker than a legal showdown. "Brent," Janelle said, walking into her office. "What is this? What do you want?" Brent stood, his expression hardening. "I'm not here to negotiate for myself, Janelle. I'm here because of what you've forced me into. What you're about to destroy." Janelle raised an eyebrow. "Destroy? You're the one trying to destroy everything. But if you're here to offer some last-minute apology or retreat, it's too late." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You don't understand. You've got nothing left. You've pushed this too far." She crossed her arms, standing firm. "What are you talking about?" Brent sighed, leaning forward on the desk. "You think this is just about the case, don't you? The fraud, the discrimination, the files you've dug up. You're so caught up in your own self-righteousness, you don't see what's happening right in front of you." Janelle's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Brent's lips curled into a tight, forced smile. "The truth is, I did what I had to do. We all did. And now it's your turn. You want to save Darnell? You want to prove you're right? Fine. But the moment that verdict is handed down, you'll be out. Your firm will be gone. Your career, gone. They'll blackball you so hard, no one will hire you. You'll never work again." Janelle felt the cold bite of his words, but she refused to show fear. "Is that a threat?" "No, Janelle. It's the reality," Brent said, pushing a folder across the desk toward her. "This is a list of people in your life. People you care about. Family, colleagues, close friends. It's not just you they'll come for. It's everyone. You make the wrong choice, and it all goes away. Everything." Janelle's heart raced as she opened the folder. Inside were names, addresses, phone numbers, personal details that were unmistakably invasive. It was a file of everything that could be used to destroy the people she loved. She clenched her fists, the room spinning as she stared at the faces of the people she'd promised to protect. "I'm offering you a way out, Janelle," Brent said, his voice low, almost pleading. "You pull out of this case. You drop everything. You let it go, and I'll make sure no one touches your people. Your career won't be ruined. Your life won't be torn apart." Janelle felt the weight of his words like chains tightening around her chest. There it was, the ultimate dilemma. She could walk away, drop the case, save her career, save the people she loved. Or she could continue, push for justice, knowing that the cost could be more than just her future. It could be the safety and security of everyone she cared about. Her mind raced. What if I give in? What if I just let them win? The temptation to walk away was real. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, her career, her reputation, her relationships, it could all vanish in an instant if she refused to accept the deal. But then, the thought of Darnell, the person who had trusted her, who had fought for his truth in the face of overwhelming odds, stopped her cold. She couldn't betray him. She couldn't betray everything she had believed in for her entire career. Justice, truth, the people who stood up, even when the world told them to stay silent. "No," Janelle said firmly, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm not backing down." Brent's eyes darkened. "You're making a mistake, Janelle. This won't end how you think it will." "I know exactly how it's going to end," she said, standing up and walking around the desk. "With you losing everything. Not me. Not Darnell. You." Brent stood, his expression hard. "You want a war? Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you." He turned and left the room, the door slamming behind him. Janelle stood in her office, her hands trembling. She knew this was just the beginning. The battle wasn't just in the courtroom anymore. It was a personal fight. A fight to hold on to everything that made her who she was. Integrity, courage, the belief that some things were worth losing everything for. And yet, as she looked at the file Brent had left on her desk, she couldn't help but wonder, what if I'm wrong? What if I can't protect everyone? The weight of that uncertainty pressed on her chest like an invisible force. But she couldn't turn back now. Not when they were this close to winning. She picked up the phone and called Micah. I need everything on GlanceTech's board of directors. And I need it yesterday. She hung up, staring at the file. She wasn't just fighting for Darnell anymore. She was fighting for herself, for everything she had built. And if Brent thought she could be intimidated, he had another thing coming. Her choice was made. She would fight, even if it cost her everything. The courtroom was thick with tension as Janelle walked back to her seat. The last few days had been a whirlwind, filled with strategic maneuvers, last-minute discoveries, and the constant push to keep the case from collapsing under the weight of corporate power. But now, it all came down to this. The final day of the trial. Her heart pounded in her chest as the judge called the proceedings to order. This was the moment. Everything she had worked for, the long hours, the sacrifices, the risks, would culminate in this final showdown. She glanced at Darnell, who sat at the defendant's table, his eyes tired but determined. She could see the doubt in his eyes, the fear of what might happen if they lost. He had placed his entire future in her hands, and she wasn't about to let him down. Brent Carlile sat at the opposing table, his usual confident smirk replaced with a grim determination. He knew he was losing. The evidence was overwhelming. The truth was out, but he still had one card left to play. The judge called on the defense. Brent stood up, his voice smooth, rehearsed, and full of the arrogance that had gotten him this far. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, we've seen a lot of accusations in this courtroom. But what we have not seen is any actual evidence that links my client, GlanceTech, to the charges that have been leveled against them. Yes, there was a leak. Yes, there were mistakes made. But those are the actions of individuals, not the company as a whole. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. I ask you to look at the facts. This is a case built on speculation and hearsay. And when you strip away the emotional appeals, all you're left with is a disgruntled former employee who got fired for cause. There is no fraud here. There is no conspiracy. Only a man trying to save his own reputation after failing to meet the standards set by his employer. Janelle's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. She had expected this, the final, desperate attempt to paint Darnell as the villain, the last-ditch effort to turn the tide. But she wasn't going to let it work. When it was her turn to speak, Janelle stood up, her voice steady and unwavering. You heard the defense. You've heard their version of events. But now it's time for the truth. The truth that GlanceTech tried so hard to hide. The truth that Brent Carlile and the board of directors tried to bury by silencing anyone who dared to speak up. She paced in front of the jury, making eye contact with each member. I've shown you the evidence, emails, documents, witnesses, all pointing to one undeniable fact. GlanceTech was not only complicit in the mistreatment of its employees, but it actively participated in an illegal scheme to cover up its financial wrongdoing. And what happened to Darnell Hayes? He dared to ask questions. He dared to uncover the truth. And for that, they made him a target. She stopped pacing and faced the jury head-on. But there's something else I want to show you. Something that goes beyond just corporate greed. Something personal. Something that speaks to the heart of who we are as a society. She pulled out a file from her briefcase and slammed it down on the table. This is a report from an anonymous whistleblower within GlanceTech's HR department. It details how Darnell was singled out for his race and how, despite his stellar performance, he was subjected to discriminatory practices that no one else in this courtroom has had the courage to acknowledge. The room fell silent. Even the judge leaned forward, intrigued. Janelle continued, but what's most disturbing is what you didn't see in this case. What was deliberately hidden? Darnell's career wasn't just derailed because of corporate greed. It was derailed because he was black, because he stood up and said that something was wrong. And that, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is where the real crime lies. The weight of her words hung in the air. The jury was watching her now, not just as a lawyer, but as a person who believed in something greater than winning a case. She believed in justice. And justice meant exposing the truth, no matter how high the stakes. But just as she thought the room was finally on her side, something unexpected happened. The doors of the courtroom slammed open. The commotion came from the back of the room, and before anyone could react, a woman rushed in, holding up her hands in a desperate attempt to get attention. I'm sorry. I need to speak. It's about GlanceTech. About the fraud. The room went still. Janelle's eyes widened as the woman was escorted by a bailiff to the front of the courtroom. She was older, with sharp eyes and an air of desperation about her. "Who are you?" the judge asked, clearly taken aback. "My name is Tasha Mitchell," the woman said, her voice shaky but determined. "I worked in the legal department of GlanceTech for over 15 years. And I have evidence that none of you have seen. Real evidence. Proof that the company orchestrated the whole scheme. And I can prove it was Carlyle who covered it up." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, but Tasha pressed forward. "I have emails. I have internal reports. I have everything you need to tie him to the crimes he's been committing, not just against Darnell, but against every employee he's ever fired. Every person who ever stood in his way." Brent's face went pale. The judge called for order, and Tasha was sworn in. She spoke, her voice growing steadier as she relayed the full scope of the fraud and the cover-up, including the illegal termination of Darnell. She confirmed everything Janelle had suspected, and more. Not only had the company targeted Darnell because of his race, but they had also sought to protect their bottom line at any cost, silencing anyone who dared to speak the truth. When Tasha finished, the courtroom was dead silent. Brent stood, his face contorted with anger. "This is absurd. You're lying." But the damage was done. The jury had seen enough. The evidence was irrefutable. The lies had unraveled in front of them. And as the judge called for a brief recess, Janelle felt the weight of everything shifting. She had done it. They had done it. The truth had come to light, and the tide had turned. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, microphones in hand, eager to get the first word on the bombshell that had just dropped. The media storm was about to engulf GlanceTech and Brent Carlyle. But in that moment, Janelle didn't care about the headlines. She didn't care about the victory, the recognition, or the accolades. All she cared about was that Darnell's name had been cleared. The injustice had been exposed. And as the courtroom doors closed behind her, she couldn't help but smile. The battle was won, but the war, the fight for justice, was far from over. The days following the trial were a blur. It felt like the entire world had turned its gaze on the courtroom drama that had played out so publicly. Headlines screamed, news outlets interviewed every person involved, and social media buzzed with every angle of the case. But Janelle hardly paid attention to any of it. She had won. She had done what she set out to do. But now, in the quiet aftermath, she was left with the weight of everything that had transpired. Darnell called her the day after the verdict. "Janelle," his voice was filled with emotion, a mixture of relief and gratitude. "You saved me. I don't even know how to thank you. I was sure it was over. But you didn't give up." She could hear the tears in his voice, and it took everything in her not to break down as well. "You never gave up, Darnell. And that's why we won. You fought for the truth, and I'm just glad I could help make sure it came out. You're not just a lawyer," Darnell continued. "You're a fighter. A warrior. You changed my life." Janelle stood by the window of her office, looking out at the skyline. She wasn't sure what the future held. Her career had been forever altered by this case. The high-profile victory, the publicity, the scrutiny. But there was a part of her that felt both fulfilled and incomplete. She had won the case, but the fight for justice was far from over. As the phone call ended, she sat down at her desk, staring at the pile of new cases that had been stacked in front of her. A wave of exhaustion hit her, but as she reached for the first file, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unexpected message. The text was from Laura, her assistant. "Brent Carlyle has resigned. GlanceTech's board has been dissolved. There's an investigation into the entire company." Janelle's heart skipped a beat. The victory didn't end with the verdict in court. It had spread throughout the entire corporate structure. The press was now turning its spotlight on GlanceTech, exposing everything. The fraudulent activities, the corrupt executives, the employees who had been mistreated for years. The ripple effect was going to change everything. The truth had set a precedent. It had ignited a fire that couldn't be extinguished. And it wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about the larger systemic issues that no one had been willing to confront before. Janelle couldn't help but smile as she put her phone down. She had been right all along. The truth had the power to tear down the walls built by greed and corruption. And now, the very people who thought they were invincible were falling one by one. That night, as she sat at her kitchen table, reflecting on everything that had happened, a knock on her door broke her train of thought. It was late, and she wasn't expecting anyone. But when she opened it, Darnell stood there, holding a bouquet of flowers in his hand. "Janelle," he said, his voice full of gratitude. I couldn't let you walk away without saying thank you, truly. You saved my future. You saved my life. Janelle's eyes softened. You saved yourself. I just helped you get the truth out. Darnell smiled, handing her the flowers. Still, it's not every day someone takes on a fight like this. You changed the game. For all of us. Janelle accepted the flowers, touched by his words. But as she stood there, the full weight of the journey they had been on hit her. She had been tested in ways she hadn't expected. And through it all, she had come out stronger. But there was more work to do. So much more. You're right, she said after a moment of silence. This isn't just about one case. It's about everything. It's about making sure that no one else has to fight this alone. Darnell nodded. Exactly. And now that you've proven what you can do, I know you're going to keep making waves. You've just started. As he turned to leave, Janelle couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The fight wasn't over, but it had taken a significant turn. This case would be remembered, not just for the legal battle, but for the larger message it sent. It wasn't just about winning the fight. It was about what happened afterward. It was about the world seeing that justice could be served, that the truth could be heard, and that the corrupt would be held accountable, no matter how powerful they thought they were. The sun was rising the next morning when Janelle stepped outside. She had a lot of work ahead of her. More cases to handle, more battles to fight, more people to stand up for. But for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The victory was real. The change was happening. And she would be right there in the middle of it, pushing for justice, making sure the truth never stayed buried again. As she walked down the street, a reporter approached her. Ms. Blackwell, what's next for you? She smiled, a fierce glint in her eyes. The fight never ends. It's just beginning. And as the camera clicked, capturing that moment, Janelle knew that this was just the start of something much bigger. The fight for justice, the battle for truth, and the quest for change, all of it had just begun.